thanks everyone for your warm welcome. It's a delight to be here and to have settled. And everyone's asking, how's the house and how are the kids and school, and Tash, my wife, and I just overwhelmed with just God's provision and timing, and just the love of moving into a church family. But on a day like today, really we see the connection between the churches in the whole town. What a wonderful blessing it's been, and as people in the past, and all of you have built up that fellowship right across the town. So Tash, Jake, Chloe and myself are very thankful, and we are super excited to be here amongst you, and we thank you for all that you've done to help us settle so well. One of the joys of moving to a new town is walking around and driving around the town, and looking at the restaurants and cafes, and seeing where you might eat on a Friday or Saturday night. And we've been doing that, sort of eagle-eye for new little haunts to investigate. And one that's come across my path is a place in the town called Rostich, I believe. And if anyone's been there. Now, Rostich got my attention. I went onto the website. An Italian friend of mine told me about it because I spent some time living, and when I was at secondary school, I did a student exchange to Italy in the region of Abruzzo, in a place called Pescara on the coast. There's a coastal theme here: Sydney, Pescara, and Eastbourne. But I spent some time there, and Rostich is the chef there cooks traditional meals from this region, and one of the meals they cook is rosticini, which is suckling pig or lamb. It's very delicate, on skewers, very small. Sorry to any of you if you're a vegan, you won't appreciate this, but they're delightful. And I've been telling Jake and Chloe and Tash just how succulent they are, how amazing they are. And so hopefully we'll be going there in some time. But I want you to imagine, maybe in a few weeks' time, if we turn up to Rostich and we order a rosticini, and it comes sizzling hot to the table, the waiter places it on the table, and you can smell the aroma, and we're salivating. And Jake and Chloe are looking, Dad, it looks like all that you've told us to be. And then imagine if I get my knife and fork and I plunge it into the rosticini, lift them all up. It comes with that sort of 50 skewers, it's that sort of delicate, and I plunge my knife and fork into it, lift them all up, and put them onto the side plate. And then I tuck into the leaves of salad underneath. Could you imagine what Jake and Chloe, their eyes bulging out of their head? Dad, what are you doing? We've come here for rosticini and you're eating the lettuce. What on earth are you doing? It doesn't make any sense. Why would you set aside the main course for just the periphery? And I told you that story because in many ways that is the story of my life's journey of faith. And it brings me to one of my favourite verses in the Bible, which is Galatians 2, verse 21, which says, I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be attained through the law, then Christ died for nothing. And that verse really summarises my journey, summarises my life in the past, present, and my desires for the future. My heart's desire, ever since I became a Christian, is to never set aside the main course, to never set aside Jesus Christ, to keep him front and centre. Let me tell you how I came to faith, how this works out. When growing up, I was taken to church and Sunday school as a little boy. And each Sunday morning we'd get up and put on our Sunday best and Our mum would try and comb our hair, my brother and sister, and we'd go off to church. And that was really nice. An hour on a Sunday, didn't take up too much time, nice people, didn't have to do much, so just be nice. And for years I thought that's what being a Christian was all about, just being nice. And I thought, oh, this is fine, great. But I remember when I was 7 years old, and actually I was in church, there was no Sunday school that day, and I heard a sermon from the Reverend Davis, and he explained the gospel. And I was 7 years old. It's quite remarkable how much our children can take in. We shouldn't underestimate that, should we? And I remember Graham Davis telling me the wonderful news about Jesus Christ, that God sent Jesus into the world to rescue us because he loves us. He died on the cross to take away our sin, to bring us into his family. And I thought this was the most amazing news I'd ever heard. I thought just about, before that, being a Christian was just about being nice. But now I've heard of God's love, God's rescue, and God's plan to keep me forever. And I remember vividly walking outside St Andrew's Uniting Church, Longueville in Sydney, looking up into the sky and just saying, thank you, God, for this amazing news. This is the most amazing news I have ever heard, and I think I'll ever hear. But God, I am only a young 7-year-old boy. Help me, please, to never forget this wonderful news. As young people growing up in Australia often do, they're outside and they're playing sports and so forth. I've told Jake and Chloe, growing up, you know, before when I grew up, there was no iPad, there was no internet. You know, it was really the dark ages. But in Australia, growing up, we only had one thing really to play with, and that was called the outside. So we were outside playing cricket and football, enjoying Sydney Harbour, water sports, all of it. And I got quite good at cricket and football and was selected in some representative teams. And so growing up in my early teens and so forth, that meant training several times a week, playing matches on Saturdays and Sundays. And so if you're playing sport on the weekend, then church drops off the radar, doesn't it? And so I wasn't able to go to church. I mean, I didn't think of that was a really bad thing. So I enjoyed playing football and cricket and travelling hours on end. Mum was a great taxi driver, driving us for hours to play games of cricket and football midweek on the weekend, and it was wonderful. I was also living the charmed life, and I thought nothing of it. And it was only when I came to university years, in my early 20s, and a good friend of mine, he passed away. I was friends with his brother, and by extension we became friends as well. And this chap, Daniel, he'd had quite a difficult childhood and growing up, and he dealt with that by turning to drugs. And for a while he was doing quite well, getting back on his feet, he was employed, so forth, but then he sort of hit another hurdle, and then he had an overdose one day, and he died. This is when I was in my early 20s, and up until that point, I think in some ways I lived the charmed life. You know, I thought, you know, bad things only happened to other people. You know, I knew there was pain and suffering in the world, but I had never really experienced any of it myself. Life was good. And all of a sudden, I was faced with this personal sadness and grief that I'd never come across before in a real intimate way. And it really brought across the big questions of life across my path. What happens when you die? Why has this happened? What is life all about? And I kept on asking myself, it was like this black cloud of death was just hovering there. And it changed my whole perspective on life. You know, actually, bad things, sad things have now happened to me and my friends and family. What is life all about? What happens after death? If there's nothing after death, then what's the point of living? Is it just eat, drink, and be merry and do what you want and pack as much fun into this life as you can? Or is there something more? In view of what happens at death, how do we now live today? What should I spend my time doing? You know, many of us run around sort of getting the education we need and the qualifications we need to have the successful life that we all want. Some of us are not able to, or circumstances prevent us. The book of Ecclesiastes really describes this really vividly. What should we do? How should we live? But this question of, well, this barrier of death that had now entered really vividly into my world had really drawn these questions to I needed to confront them. I needed answers. And wonderfully, it was at that moment, when I was thinking all these things through, that I remembered that time I was standing on the step of the door of St Andrew's Uniting Church in Longville, and I remembered looking up into the sky, and I remembered those words, God, I remember I'm only a small boy. Help me never to forget the wonderful promises that you've made to me in Jesus Christ. And I realise now it was the Holy Spirit reminding me of God's faithfulness and God's gospel about Jesus Christ. It was wonderful to remember that Jesus came in to the world to save me, to comfort me, to bring me into a relationship with him. But you know what? Then I thought, well, now I've ignored him for all these years. I must have to pay him back. I must have to be really good and really nice. And again, I think it was the Holy Spirit prompting me to say, no. But that's why Jesus died. He is died to take away your sin, to take away all those times you've ignored him and lived for yourself. He's done all of that for you. And he's offering you a free gift, the gift of grace, undeserved. You're not able to achieve it, James. You just need to receive it. Galatians 2:21. I do not set aside the grace of God. Or if righteousness, if it could be made right with God by doing good things and keeping the law, well then there was no need for Jesus to come and die. And as I was thinking about these things, I was absolutely overwhelmed with the love of God shown to me in Jesus. That I've done exactly what I've wanted for so many years. God had blessed me with the ability to make friends, to enjoy sport, to have this charmed life. And now, even in times of grief, God again was blessing me with a really true understanding of the gospel of grace. And so from that point, it was my heart's desire to never set aside God's grace ever again. Every day I wake up praising God. That it's not what I do, but it's what Christ has done for me. No matter how your day goes, if you're a Christian, you are a child of God, you are loved by God, you are safe in God's everlasting arms forever. And that is your identity. That's my identity. Jesus Christ died for me. And that is the most wonderful news that anyone could ever hear, that everyone needs to hear. And coming to Eastbourne to be the vicar of All Saints, that is my heart's desire for myself and my family, and for all of us to never. We can get so busy. The pandemic slowed us down a bit, but my heart's desire for all of us is to never set aside God's grace in Jesus Christ. We can do lots of things, and we will do lots of things, and talk about lots of issues and get involved with lots of activities. But at the heart of everything has to be Jesus Christ and his loving grace, his free gift, his free offer and invitation to know him and be loved by him and to remain in him. That's got to be front and centre in all we do. That's my heart's desire for me, my family, and all of us, and all the churches in Eastbourne. Let me push on from that day when I became a Christian. The very next Sunday, I remember chatting to a Christian friend of mine, Todd Neal, great friend, and he sort of said, well, come on, I think we need to well, I actually said to him, Todd, I've become a Christian, I think I need to go to a church to find out more about Jesus. And I didn't really know which one to go to, where some younger people were, and so Todd took me along to St Thomas's North Sydney, and we met some wonderful people there, and all I knew, I just had to go there and hear the Bible explained and learn more about Jesus. You know, churches have sort of funny ways of doing things for new people. They, like in joining any sort of club, you think, oh, how do they do this? How do they do that? All I knew, I needed to go to that church building to hear the minister there open the Bible and tell me about Jesus. And then the rest, I could figure out the rest later on. That is my hope as well, as we welcome new people into our church family here, that we show them Jesus and they can figure out, the subculture sort of later on. But it'll be welcoming and warm and be centered on Jesus Christ. One of the people that I must mention that I met at church was a lovely lady called Natasha Mann. She was an English girl from Hampshire, and she was travelling out in Australia and working as in management for a hospital. And we met at church and thought she was a lovely lady, but she was just here visiting and working for a year. She'll probably be back in the UK in a year's time. It turned out that she applied for another job and got a visa extension, and then it turned out that our church there decided to do a church plant into a neighbouring suburb, and so Natasha and I and 40 other people started a church plant called Church by the Bridge, right underneath Sydney Harbour Bridge, and in God's guidance, Tash and I got to know each other. I asked her out once, and she said no. I asked her out a second time, and she said no. And then, about a month later, she asked me out. And I really wanted to think, yes, let's go out. And then, wonderfully, the rest is history. And on the 14th of October 2006, we got married. And we were living and working in Sydney for a few years, and then decided to come back to the UK so I could train for ministry. I was selected for ordination in the Church of England, and then studied at Oak Hill Theological College, did a curacy in Ongar, which some of you know of, and then went back to North London to Cockfosters. Has been there the last 5 years, and now wonderfully God has moved us to come here. All in his timing, all in his grace. I think all the way along my life's journey, as I've said before, that Galatians 2 verse 21 has been so important to me. In all that we do, think and say, we want to keep God's grace front and centre. We're not perfect. God is slowly transforming us into his likeness, but he's also a forgiving God and gracious and patient, and he'll be moulding us to be more like him, and we need bucket loads of grace, and so we need to stay close to the God of grace, not to set him aside in all we do. So that's my heart's desire for us and the family's desire, to see us all grow in God's grace, his free gift. Not to earn it, but just to receive it and to pass it on in word and deed to others. So there's a little outline of my life. Here's a little few snapshots. Tash and I were looking at some photos last night. This took us hours to put together because you start looking at photos, you think, well, I could show them thousands of photos, but where are we going to start? Here's a little one. There was a double graduation. So I went to Sydney University, graduated an arts degree in Italian and linguistics, and the uniform underneath was a customs uniform. So I worked at Sydney Airport as a customs officer for several years. So if you've seen the program Border Security, well, I was on the first series in the background, giving people a hard time as they came and went into Sydney. If we go to the next one. And that's the step of St Andrew's Uniting Church, Longueville. So that's where I looked up into the sky and asked God to help me remember his wonderful promises. And so last time we went back to Australia, I had to get a family snap, just to remind me of God's grace, his generous provision for me and my family. Isn't it wonderful to think back over the years in your life of how good and gracious God has been to each and every one of us? Next one. So that was Tash and Jake and Chloe, obviously. And yeah, that was 14th of October, 2006. A very warm day. So warm, in fact, I think I lost a bit of hair. And there we are. There was the wonderful licensing service just a week or so ago in All Saints. Well, that's I could bore you for hours, but go on. Go on. I want to open it up and just any questions that you have for me, just so we can get to know each other a bit better.
I just wondered why you came back to the UK to study theology, really. Why not stay in Sydney and build your life there?
Yeah, great question. And we, I think the simple answer is just God's guidance and doors that opened, and the sense of excitement and adventure, and the need for gospel ministry in this country and everywhere. Yeah, a great question.
I'm very glad you did.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, yeah, there's need in Sydney. There's wonderful churches in Sydney as well. There's a great theological college that was 20 minutes away. And a lot of people ask me, why didn't you go there? I said, well, I was looking at the application, but God moved us in this direction. I suppose that's the best way I can answer it. Derek.
Why did Tash say no?
Derek, that is a very important question. Very insightful. If you could ask her and find out the reason.
Where does Tash hail from?
So Tash is a Hampshire girl. She grew up in the New Forest, so in Lyndhurst, and then her parents still live in a village in the New Forest called Sway. A delightful place, so only about 2 hours across from here. Yeah.
Do you find it, when you pray with your children, do you have a specific time during the day, or do they come to you for their request and prayer as a family, or do you just do it separate, you and Tash separately?
Question is, do we sort of pray as a family and with the children at a set time of the day, or sort of how do we do it? I think it's being intentional. So try to set up some patterns, but it also depends on the child. So Jake is a morning person, Chloe is an evening person. So it's so trying to be intentional at some point in the day, but then it is, the scriptures tell us to talk about things of the Lord throughout the day, just in a natural way. And then we just try to sort of do it sort of little but often throughout the day, so it just becomes a normal thing, not a sort of another big thing we've got to add to the agenda at the end of a long day when we're all tired. So just scattered throughout the day, but intentionally trying to do that as well.
As you're gifted in linguistics, does that mean that you're fluent in Hebrew and Greek?
A very insightful question. Unfortunately not. It was more sociolinguistics, so how language is used in different cultures and so forth. But yeah, I wish I had the ability But I do trust many of the great scholars with greater gifts than I have. Very helpful. Why don't you, Dennis?
When are you going to play cricket?
Yeah, great. Well, so the Church of England has something called the Church Times Cup. So each diocese puts forward a team. So the standard of cricket, I must say, is leisurely and enjoyable, but not that competitive. So I played for London for the last few years, and I think London won the cup 5 out of the last 6 years. We played Chichester in the semi-final, and sort of beat them comfortably. So some of them in the Chichester diocese have already sort of said, you must sign up, you must sign up. But obviously, last year's season didn't go ahead with the restrictions. But hopefully next year, that's another year where the left arm gets a little bit slower and weaker. But yeah, I do enjoy playing and watching cricket indeed. Great. Well, it's been wonderful to meet you all, getting to know you. That is my great reminder to us, never to set aside God's grace. Why don't, if you're comfortable, why don't you turn in your tables and just encourage each other with a few words, and maybe one person on the table might like to pray. Just a very short prayer, just thanking God for His grace to you all in your lives. How about we do that?